that's the audio.
And I'm getting mighty tired of your trifling ways and of listening to that jackass Bray.
I had one which was about my subject, and that was half an hour, and then I had one which was about like who I am as a person, and that was half an hour. The second one, it was really enjoyable actually. It was with Michelle Gavinox.
Oh, Michelle Gavinox!
Medwards in particular, I just think I wouldn't say I enjoyed it, but the conversation was objectively like.
The Medwards interviews are really good.
Yeah,
the
they were very
really
kind,
good.
I would say, and caring.
So a general interview is an interview that isn't just about a specific subject or your subject, it's more
about your life.
How you doing?
Yeah.
What do you like as a student and as a person in a community at a university?
It's just also speak about yourself.
Yeah, so you've written a personal statement, you've written a supplementary application questionnaire. Now you're prepping for an interview. How do they link, and what do you need to do, in your guys' opinion, in order to go from having a personal statement on a sheet of paper to being prepared to talk about that personal statement in your interview?
I got asked about my EPQ, which was within my personal statement.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got asked like a couple of questions at the end of each interview that referenced her.
I got grilled on mine, and I didn't think I would be, and I got grilled on my essays too, and I really didn't think I would be. It almost caught me out. So read everything that you've submitted to them before your interview.
I didn't get grilled, but I prepared just because I knew that they might do that.
Yeah,
I didn't want to be caught out, and so I would say assume you will be grilled, hope that you won't be.
I had 2 interviews, they were both half an hour, and in both of them the end 15 minutes was on something in my personal statement. When I got asked about my personal statement, because I did get asked about my personal statement, I expected it to be I'd get asked a question on a bunch of different things. But what they did instead was they would take one thing from my personal statement that they thought was quite interesting and then go on for ages.
Which is kind of stressful because you don't know which thing that's going to be.
Yeah.
And if it's something you don't enjoy very much, then that's a bit...
This is one of those things where you might have put stuff in your personal statement that you only put in just to sound good.
Don't do that. Just put
it's too late for them now.
So
just now you have to. Now what you need to do is take that piece of information that you're not too passionate about, and you need to find something specific in there that you are really passionate about.
Yeah. You can choose to take it in that direction.
They are interested in how you make links between things, not what you're actually saying. They want to know how you get from A to B. They want to see the journey rather than they don't really care about A or B. They just want to see how you get between the two.
Yeah. They don't care who you are as somebody who has experienced things. They care about you as a thinker.
I got asked questions about my coursework as well, which was not something I was expected to be asked about at all. No one had said to me, "Oh, they might ask you," because in geography your coursework is in a report style, and you do that quite a lot here.
Yeah.
And I actually got asked about it in both of my interviews separately, and no one had ever said, "Oh, reread your coursework," but they were really just in that.
Part of the SAQ is that you've put down all of the modules that you've taken and all of your coursework and stuff. Do keep that in mind.
If you have been on a gap year, make sure that you have access to your old A-level things, because I got asked about my A-level texts literally a year and a half on from leaving school. No, not a year and a half, 6 months on from leaving school. And I wasn't studying them anymore, and that was really difficult, but I had reread them, so it was fine. But if you're doing English or history or anything like that, make sure you do have some kind of fresh knowledge of what you've looked at before.
Humanities have dominated this conversation.
Sorry.
Natskis, tell us about your personal statement.
Right, so what I did in my personal statement was I went through each sentence individually, and I put a question mark after it.
The Insmo method.
Yeah, and then I took that and I put it at the top of a Google Doc as a title. Then I typed everything I could say about that one sentence.
That's really cool.
And so for everything they could say, I had at least a starting point of what I could say. And then I printed that out and I highlighted and I annotated how I would get between those points basically. So if they ask me about this, I can still talk about this, or if they ask me about this, I can still talk about this. So and then they basically asked me nothing about my personal statement. So it's a bit of a waste of time. But
it's not.
They could have done that.
Yeah. So I didn't do that, but I didn't get asked about my personal statement at all. But obviously I prepared in case I did. So if you wrote an EPQ, read through your EPQ, even if it was half a year ago, just read through it.
Your EPQ is the closest research document you're going to do to the way that you're going to write essays when you're here.
Exactly. So, and especially because you're going to be writing on something you're passionate about, you have a lot to say.
Especially for STEM, because you're probably not that used to writing essays during A levels. I didn't write essays during A levels, so your EPQ is the only thing where you've actually done that long writing.
Even if you have done entirely essay subjects, the essays that you're writing in exam conditions are nothing like the essays that you're going to do here, and they're looking for the essays that you're going to do here. And coursework, EPQ, research documents, they're much closer to that.
ELAT's close comparison is really similar to how you're going to write here. You just add in context here. But yeah, again, like, because you are either at school or on a year off, they don't expect you to be writing to the same degree as a third year or even first year student. So don't stress too much.
With the stuff in a personal statement as well, I wrote about a study or a book, so make sure you have something to say about them, because they could bring up.
The book. I hadn't read the books.
I guess
and then I had to like cram read them for my interview.
Okay.
Or if you have read them but it's like not fresh in your mind, you can like find like summaries online and then pick out the points that you're most interested in. Because,
write notes about the books you've read.
If you've found a really cool example, because obviously science is different to like English books, but they mentioned a really cool like evolution pathway in this animal. So I highlighted it and I was like, and then I was like, if they asked me about that, I have something to say, because I didn't really know about the book I wrote about in my personal statement. I mean, I'd read it, but also another piece of advice is, for me, I know you wrote through what you could say about it, but I wanted to make sure I could vocalise that. So I would be like, okay, in this I wrote about this book, I'm now going to talk literally to myself about it, so that I'd be able to put what I'm thinking into words, basically.
We'll get onto this because we're going to talk about practice interviews, but anything that you do where you're saying it out loud, record yourself, listen it back, and it's going to be horrible. It's going to be a horrible experience, and it's going to stress you out. So but it's so important to hear the way that you express yourself.
I think body language is also really important. I don't know if you're going to do this later, but I might be going. But body language is really important. Have someone, if you can, you do practice interview. I had to literally sit on my hands because I didn't know how much I wave my hands around when I speak and how I look around. I sat on my hands like this during my interview because otherwise it was so distracting.
You can do that when you're online, don't do it if you're in person.
I never looked at the camera. I still have this issue. I always looking up, basically. So my uncle bought me smiley face stickers and told me to put them next to my camera. So
Is that why you've got smiley faces?
Yeah, so I would smile at smile at my camera when I was doing my online interview, and that's why they're still on my laptop.
I did the questions thing. Me and a friend sat down and like asked each other questions on our like reading through personal statements, because then it's someone else's point of view. What would someone else find interesting?
Or like what would they pick up on?
Yeah, exactly.
Do lots of practice interviews if you can. Especially for English, there are lots of different ways that they will want to ask questions. Sometimes they'll ask you really abstract things like, what is a poem? What is tragedy? They don't expect you to recite the dictionary. You've got to make something up and be able to like run with your line of argument. Second one, you will get extracts, and these aren't always poems. I made this mistake. I was practicing for unseen poetry so many times, and in my interview, not only did I not have one poem, I didn't have any poems, I had 2 extracts. One was from the beginning of a novel and one was from the beginning of a biography about film or something like that. And I had to compare them. So make sure you're reading lots of different kinds of texts and exploring lots of different ways of analysing and crossing things over.
It's been a long time.
See, now I'm the only one on the floor. So we've rearranged. We've lost Jasmine and Lily, but they've sent their love.
So it's a busy life.
We have quite a lot of work to be doing.
When I put this down, everyone was like, "How long is this going to take?" I have 7 essays to do.
He starts our lectures with hello.
Now we're talking about how, like, the practical steps you need to do to prepare for your interview. This is also going to include practice interviews and what we think about them and how to get to them. I think that's worth starting with.
Just plucking hairs off your back.
I've literally been doing it.
I'd just be sitting so far away.
Where did you get them? You did 2? Where were they from?
I did one through the higher education scheme thing in Norwich, and then I did one which was kind of bad. That one was not that useful. It was useful in terms of like the interview skills, but he didn't really ask me much science specific stuff, which was kind of irrelevant. Then I did one in school with like a science teacher who was like did them like within our school. Like I don't think he actually had anything to do with Oxbridge, but yeah.
I had 3. So my school organised some online ones for the people who had been offered interviews. So I think mine was with a doctor, like a retired doctor. So I had that, which was quite good for doing an online interview. And then I had a second one with somebody at my school who was just she was a biology teacher, but also did quite a lot about maybe applications and stuff. So I just sat with her, very relaxed. This interview, she just had a long list of generic biology questions, just went through those. And my last one was with two biology teachers at my school. That was like probably the most interview style setup, which was quite useful because it was questions that they could ask you. They gave me a plan and was like, describe it, which you hear at the very classic like Cambridge interview question. So yeah, just do as many as you can.
I had one, and it was with my geography teacher at the time and an ex-geography teacher from my school, and we did it online despite being in like rooms one away, so that we could
And that's quite good.
so that we could practice doing online. But it was 20 minutes. It was good. I think it was good more in the principle of how do I feel 30 seconds before it starts, and how do I feel talking to a camera, rather than, because like the actual interview was nothing like
Being
my
like
interview.
in that question situation.
Okay, so I had three. Two were through school. One was an internal teacher, who I think went to Cambridge, and then one was like this external speaker, and then I had one through a like summer school that I'd done. Goods, bads, practice interviews. How do you get the most out of them?
So the one that I had online was through this like higher education scheme, and I don't think he was actually like a science related person, so he was asking me quite a lot, like he asked me a lot about like the ethics of science, and like which could have come out in my interview, like it was useful, but I don't think it had the structure that that the actual interviews have. But it still was useful in terms of like getting used to speaking to someone online, how I came across, if I was smiling, if I was like looking around, if I was like engaged. And then so that was useful in some aspects. And then the one I had in school was really good. Like he gave me like two like organisms, and like I had to like find links between them, and like how I could tell they were like, it was very much more like the testy kind of vibe, which my actual interview was. And I also spent like a lot of time with my chemistry teacher, where basically he made me stand at the front of the classroom with the whiteboard and the whiteboard pen, the big one, and then he'd be like, how does this work? How would this work? How would you draw this? Like, and he would like be trying to link it to like biology, like how they could like draw those links. So that was like an interview, but it was like still
It
like
is getting you thinking.
yeah, like putting you on the spot and like having you like think through different things. So I think it is really useful, just because like you probably haven't been in that situation where you're like on the spot and you're applying something that you do know, but you have a completely foreign situation for it, and you have to like
And also
try and figure out how
all
to
the
fit in.
attention is on you. Like that's another thing. Like even when you've done stuff at school, like normally it would be small group discussions, or like if you've ever done a panel or something like that. Whereas it is actually on you. Like someone asks a question and you're the one who's got to answer it.
It's down to you to actually say something.
Yeah, so it's quite different.
You're not going to know how you respond to that situation.
Yeah.
And you're also not going to know at this stage how you respond to impromptu questions that are that hard. This is the point where I want to say, online, there are these really long lists of Cambridge, Oxbridge interview questions. They're bullshit.
Yeah.
No, you're not going to walk in most circumstances. Like, it's very unlikely you're going to walk in there going to be like, what is life?
Yeah.
Or like, I don't know, how, the big one that they always get is like, how would you count all the light bulbs in London or something?
Or like, how would you work out how much oxygen there was in this
what's the
room?
mass
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
hair in this room? Yeah.
They really, like, they just don't bother.
No.
They don't do that. They're probably going to ask you about things within the scope of
Also,
stuff
if
you've
they
already studied.
do ask you that, you can't prepare for that anyway.
Yeah.
There's
So
no-
don't get yourself stressed about that. My other tip for practice interviews is record yourself. I said this before, but I'm going to say it again. Record, like literally, two of mine were online, and both of them I set my camera up in the corner, and I just filmed myself responding. And it's a horrible thing to look back on, but what's really important is you find out your little attributes that you need, that like that are making it more difficult for you to answer the question. I found that I would have a really quick impromptu response of like, because I think laterally before I think forward in the question, and this applies I think mostly to like humanities, but so if someone asked me a question like this, I would talk about all of the things around it before I'd just go and answer the question. So what I did once I'd seen that on video, I was like, oh my god, that's like, it just seems like I'm not answering the question. So what I did instead was I focused on taking 2 seconds before I started speaking and going, right, which of these pieces of information that are in my brain right now is most closely related to the short answer to the question, and from there you can branch out. That's a really big problem for humanities students. We all do it. Don't let yourself do it. That's a very specific example, but record yourself,
I think
look back on yourself, reflect.
I think that's also relevant to STEM, like having an immediate response that's like directly answering the question and then explaining how you got there.
Yeah, especially your thoughts.
Yeah.
But getting the most out of the practice ones, it may not be the most useful thing, but just my advice is to do them, which sounds like a bit silly that obviously you need to do them, but it's very unlikely you're going to be asked the exact same question in a practice interview as you are in your actual interview. So it's less about, in your practice interviews, how you answer the specific question, but it's what you take away from how you answer a question and getting more fluid with portraying your ideas, especially with science. Like it's more like factual. You know, humanities, you're often explaining your ideas. It's how do I then put my idea verbally? So yeah, it's just actually just doing many as you can and speaking it through.
I learned that I can't actually do maths on the spot when someone asks me a maths question, and I kind of forgot that maths could be a part of my interview. And in my practice interview, I got asked to calculate the average population of a London borough. And to be fair, I guess that's a bit like one of those
Was that
questions
in your
you can
practice
get
or
asked.
your
In my
real?
practice interview.
Because they take them off the lists. Careful of practice interviews.
Yeah, in my practice interview, and I knew the population of London, and I knew the number of boroughs, and I literally could not divide the two. And I was doing maths A-level, like I know that I can do maths, but I learned that on the spot, when there's two people staring at you, I can't do maths. So that was really helpful, just learning that, and then I was able to do some practice. I was like, ask me a maths question.
Before we move on to a conversation about general interview prep, I want to disclaim about practice interviews because I had a really bad experience with one of them. I got advice at the end of a practice interview from someone, an external speaker from my school, who had done an interview with me, where she was basically like, oh, that was great, like you'll fly by, you're okay, that's totally fine, but just remember, what you need to do is just cram in as much information as possible and show them that you've researched and that you know a lot. That is information, like that's the one piece of advice that you get given constantly, that you need to know a lot, that is honestly the worst possible thing you can do in your interview. The one thing you don't want to do is think, how can I show how much I know? You won't
Answer
get
the question
anywhere.
they ask you.
Yeah,
basically.
if you don't try and
memory.
manipulate the question to talk about what you want to talk about, because they will know.
Yeah.
Like,
Just
Answer the question as succinctly
Yeah,
as
they're interested
possible.
in how you think rather than the facts that you actually already knew. Because so much of school up to that point is just a memory test, and they're not trying to make it a memory test.
And also, they know how much you've done because you've already given them a personal statement that told them.
Yeah.
Like, they don't care that you've done 75 summer schools and done this much work experience and you've read this book. Only reference things that you've done or read or said if it's directly related to the way in which you are answering the question. If it's part of your thought process, mention it. Otherwise, do not cram in that information, and there are people doing practice interviews who will tell you that, and there are people who will give you that general advice, don't do it. And more generally, do be wary of practice interviews, because a lot of them are given by people who haven't done the interview themselves or haven't done the interview in like 40 years,
That's why
and they're
the
taking those
experience
questions
is
online.
useful. That's why the experience is useful.
Yeah. So it's a useful experience to answer questions, but take it with a grain of salt. Same thing of like the fact that they asked you a question that you probably would have never been asked in the real thing.
No. Also, every single interview is really different. That's another thing to remember. Like the interviews that I had were, having spoken to people, so different to other people on the course, so different to people who've done it a few years ago, and so different to my practice interviews. Like, it's just all about the approach rather than the actual specifics.
Been a long time.